live.
We are. We're waiting on some folks to log in. We'll repeat this as you guys get logging in. Hi, I'm David Harris with Connect Church, a TM church in Mesa, Arizona, one of the suburbs of Phoenix. I'm joined by my friends Aubrey Barnwell here in Phoenix, Kim Primeau, who's in Indianapolis area, and Neal Benson, who's suffering for Jesus up along the coast in Ventura. Appreciate you all joining us and hanging out with us. As you get logged in, pop into the chat section and just let us know your first name and where you're logging in from. Are you in California, Arizona, Bangladesh, Soviet Union, wherever you are? Let us know where you are. We just want to say thank you for being a part of this conversation. Thank you for sharing this day with us. We've got some really exciting things we're going to discuss because the world's different today than it was 12 months ago, certainly more so than 24 months ago. That means the church is different, as our restaurants, as our shopping centers, as our NFL stadiums. How do we respond in ways that position us to best reach people for Jesus? Because the goal of the Church of Jesus Christ is to still introduce people to Jesus so that their saving grace, which he gave his life for, that we just shared recently, when the Easter experience comes to bear upon them and they get a chance to look him in the eyes and say, yes, I accept your forgiveness. That's what it's all about. So as you're getting in here, logging in, let us know where you're coming in from. Hey, Brian Berman up in Visalia. And Michelle, are we going to do this in such a way where we can see everybody, or am I just going to have to keep reading chat stuff? I don't know what the answer is, but we want everybody getting a chance to be a part of this conversation. And some of our folks, I am pitch hitting. I'm like the guy that goes on the ESPN channel, who's there when all the regular guys are out. I'm sitting in for Doug, who's at the Mustard Seed Conference, and every other qualified host is there as well. So they said, David, you're the only one who answered your phone today. Would you do this? And so we're excited to have you guys here. Hey, Ken and Aubrey and Neal, thanks so much for being a part of us. Just real quickly, as folks are logging in and we're getting a chance to say hi to them, just real quickly, tell us the name of your church and the most exciting thing you've done in the last 30 days. Aubrey, you go first, since you're my partner down here in Phoenix.
Pastor Aubrey Barnwell, First New Life Church in South Phoenix, Arizona. Most exciting thing I've done in the last 30 days is I went on a personal retreat to California. Spent a couple days there and just taking in some of the water. I love the water, so I had the opportunity to do that. Unfortunately, I did twist my foot, but God even used that. So yeah, it's good.
You led your ER doctor to Jesus? Is that what?
Yes. Okay, I'll use that one.
Ken, explain to the world why you left the water that Aubrey loves so much to go to Indiana, where you can't even think about water. And what's the most exciting thing that's happened to you there in Indiana in the last 30 days?
You said to keep it short. That's going to be a longer conversation. But yeah, so I had been for 11 years in Huntington Beach, California. Someone had to serve at the beach there, and we said yes to that. Actually, before that, came from Hawaii. So I've had a lot of difficult ministry experiences, and then
hitting the head with a rock and
yeah. So we ended up actually coming out to Indiana to be a part of Mercy Road Church, which is a TM church,
and we had help we can get.
Yeah, Josh Hoosman, lead pastor and founder of it, and so we actually came out to be here for a year, and then with hopes and dreams of planting Mercy Road, Orange County, California. And then 2 weeks after we arrived here, COVID shut down the world. And then we're like, all right, God, are we supposed to, in 2021, still plant in California? And felt like God was leading a different direction. So we ended up planting Mercy Road Northeast, which is in northeast suburbs of Indianapolis area, about a half hour away from where Josh pastors in Carmel. And so we launched that in September of 2020 in the midst of COVID. So we're about 8 months old as a church plant. And it's been phenomenal, awesome what God's been doing here. And something exciting on the ministry front was on April 11th, we launched a weekly student ministry. So middle school and high school ministry,
Nice.
Which has just been awesome to be able to impact next generation.
Great. Neal, give us just a most exciting thing for you in the last 30 days, and then go ahead and kind of launch us into our conversations and give us a little bit about what evangelists look like there at Coastline during the thrust of the COVID experience.
Yeah. Yeah. So Neal Benson, and I'm at Coastline Bible Church, suffering for Jesus on the ocean. And that's been good. The most exciting thing for me in the last 30 days, I'm a pretty adventurous guy. So, but I'm going to go with that. I have been helping to coach T-ball for my son. And there is nothing like being on the field with 4 to 6 year olds on Saturday morning, teaching them how to run the bases, hit the ball, catch the ball, throw to first. They're really good at throwing to first. We still have yet to tag a kid out yet. So I feel like we're the one team in the league who needs to get that under our belt. But yeah, that part's been good.
So that's what happens when you ask God to give you patience. He makes you a T-ball coach.
Man, it is so fun. I don't think I'd rather be doing anything else on Saturday morning than that at this stage in my life. I mean, maybe snowboarding, but yeah. So your first question, I think, was what did COVID teach us about evangelism, or what did evangelism look like?
Yeah. Some of the tools you used in the process.
Yeah, I think for Coastline and even myself that when we went into pandemic mode, I've told this to a lot of people. I think there were some really good things about the pandemic that we needed to lean into. Mm-hmm. But one of those is how easy it was to invite someone to one of our church gatherings. And I think like a lot of people, we saw, a spike in attendance immediately because, your mom who lives in a different city and your aunt and, your cousin who's never been to church, but now they're like, wow, is the world really ending? Like we should probably figure this Jesus thing out. I think it really made it kind of easier in a sense, but I think what it showed people is, hey, I can actually invite someone to church with me. And, I'm so, it's probably good for me to just like throw this out here. Like if you cut me, I bleed evangelism. And so that's one of the spiritual gifts that God has given me. I love that. I love talking to people. I love talking to people about Jesus. And so it's not a hard thing for me to tell people about Jesus, but there's a lot of people who are really scared to share their faith. And there's a lot of people who aren't as extroverted as I am. And so maybe they fall a little more introverted. And so it felt very non-threatening to send someone who they love and care about a text message where maybe it felt like they wouldn't get as rejected, or it felt pretty simple to share a Facebook link with someone. And, what I really appreciate was people using technology to share the gospel through this time in a way to, what the language we use here is to just be more outreach focused.
Okay, thank you. So Aubrey, you're of the four of us, you're the one who's in more of a true urban setting. What were some of the things that you did during the whole COVID experience and everything that kind of involved with that gave you opportunities to share the gospel in unique and fresh ways? You're muted, Aubrey. Let's see if we can unmute you. There you go.
Yes. I think one of the things that the term you used was during COVID, and for us, we're still in it. And so, so one of the things I think is important, or that we did or are doing, was to really address felt needs. That was where we found ourselves being able to provide food. So we did a food distribution. We've been doing that. And even increased in that arena, in that area. The other thing that we had were specifically as it relates to the deaths and being able to reach people who experience loss, illnesses. Much of what we experienced were sudden deaths. They weren't lingering, so it was now you have a whole family who is grieving, and how do you provide an opportunity? How do you provide a experience where they can celebrate their loved ones and do it in a safe environment? And so I was pulled into a number of grade-side services and found that having to really talk about the joy of the Lord while we're standing next to someone who has passed, being able to talk about what this means, what does all of this mean? So lots of questions, of course, in regards to life and what life really means, and that really tapping into what the Spirit would say to those individuals who are holding on fast to their faith, but really challenged with everything that's going on with them. And so we've been dealing with that. Even we launched what we call Bob Talk, which was really designed to have a place where people could hear how we could bear one another's burdens and deal and walk through this season of a pandemic and physical distancing.
So with crisis, the old term being crisis is an accelerator, you actually allowed it to propel you into some things that you might not have done under ordinary circumstances, but there's probably some fruit attached to it over the long haul.
Yes.
Fantastic. So can you go to Indiana and you're there for like 6 minutes and you get thrown into deep in the pool with no life preserver? What does it look like for you as you're planning this this new congregation there in the greater Indianapolis area?
Yeah, so when you know, everyone went shelter in place and all of that hit in March, I was on staff at the 9-year-old church plant, Mercy Road, and getting to see how we navigated through that season, some of the tools that we used. And I think two really good things that came out of that season is, one, just recognizing the need of how do we reach people when we don't come to a building. And I think beyond just the online presence side of it, but how do we empower our people to live on mission and recognize that when they can't just invite people to a building and expect the pastor who's talking to be the one leading people to Christ, how do we be the hands and feet of Jesus? And so I think it forced the church to think about how do we decentralize and empower our people to live on mission. And I'll unpack a little bit on how we do that. But the second thing I think that was great was that it forced us all with technology to do outreach of, in 2 months, we figured out how to use technology, which would have taken us maybe 10 years to get there. So how do we do multiple camera angled online feeds? How do we, do the audio well? How do we do Zoom calls and figure out the mute button? And we're all, still a year into that, figuring that stuff out. But, most people in our churches hadn't spent much time on Zoom and these kinds of things. So I think it forced us to use technology, which now is going to be a tool for for these next 10 years that we'll use to reach people. But two things. One, in terms of decentralizing, that I thought was really neat is, one, we were thinking about how do we do baptisms when we were shelter in place. We couldn't invite people to the building. So we did something called bathtub baptisms. If you go to bathtubBaptism.com, there's a website that shows some of the images from that. And so about 30 people got baptized through that time, where it was empowering of, you could, share your faith with someone, and when they're ready to take that step, baptize them in the bathtub or a lake or a river. And so we had about 30 people getting baptized during those 2 months.
Now did you do that congregation wide and like Zoom it out to everybody, or Facebook Live? What was the mechanism that you used for the whole church to celebrate that?
Yeah, we just asked people to hashtag bathtub baptism on Instagram and Facebook. And then on Sundays, we would celebrate those during the live stream. Yeah, so you can go to bathtubBaptism.com and check that out. That's still on there live. But I thought that was great of just decentralizing. Like, you lead someone to Christ and baptize them. You don't need to wait to come to a building to be able to do that. So that's one way of decentralizing. And then we as a church, we organize, instead of doing traditional small groups or life groups, we organize our groups around mission, and we call them outposts. And so during the shelter in place, we were really poised for being able to be the hands and feet of Jesus and meet the needs of people, where we've empowered our groups to be able to do that. And there's less of us having to control those types of things. So feeding people who are hungry, food pantries, things like that. We don't really centralize as a church, plan and organize those things. It is outposts that will do that. And then we provide grants that they can request from the church, and we give mission dollars through our outposts. And so it was really neat to see through COVID over this last year, just our groups, the creativity of the body of Christ on how to meet the needs that God's placed around them, whether it's healthcare workers, police officers, whether it's people needing food. that we as a church organization didn't have to come up with it, but our people are meeting the needs, and we'll give dollars and kind of fan the flame of what they're doing.
Wonderful.
So just the decentralized aspect of the church, I think this COVID kind of raised up the need to empower that.
It's interesting to me as I'm listening to the three of you, I'm hearing some overlap on a few things, especially as it relates to technology and social media platforms. And yet I'm hearing some differences unique to your own setting and why you're in that setting and what you're doing to reach folks in that setting. So here's a question, and Aubrey will come back to you, but each of us get a chance to take a stab at it. What did you learn, or what have you learned over the last 12 to 14 months that you'll continue doing? And yet what will you, for lack of a better term, restore that you were doing pre-COVID in a way that'll help serve the church post-COVID in terms of the strategies that you employ for effective evangelism?
I don't know that there's anything. What I would embrace is that we will never be the same. So I don't know that there's anything that we will actually go back to. I think we're looking forward completely. We launched Alpha online during this season, and we found that it has been effective in people who are looking for a place to explore their faith. I think when we think of evangelism, and of course baptism is a good sign of that, but there are also those who have been around the church, who have been around believers, but have not been fully devoted, and we're really questioning their faith. And I think the partner to evangelism is discipleship. And if we're not discipling, it's sort of like birthing a baby and leaving them in the hospital. That next piece is, how do we make sure that they get connected? So what we've been doing is establishing ways, and content is the word I think we use for the social media platforms, and even our electronic, is what's the content and how often can we put content out, and doing some things differently than we had done before. We even did Mother's Day differently this past week. In that we normally would have gathered, but we did everything online, and it was really tremendously received.
Great, thank you. Hey, Ken, back to you. What were some of the things that you have learned that you're going to continue to employ, but what are things that maybe you were prepared to have done prior to COVID, but that you're not willing to completely get rid of, if there are any at all, as the world starts, barring something unforeseen, moving back to whatever new normal is going to look like?
Yeah. So I think one thing has been, with church online, by live casting our services, I think that's something that's going to stay and should stay for all of our churches, as people are starting to come back to the building more and more in numbers in person in the future. I think the live broadcast, recognizing church online, has become the new front door. It used to be your website. In the 90s and early 2000s, your website was the front door. People would check out your website before they show up at the building. Mm-hmm. Now I'm finding people are watching online before they show up, and sometimes multiple times. So I remember there was a first-time guest, and I was talking with her and saying, hey, we've got a teaching team, and so this week, Pastor Darren's gonna be teaching. You're gonna love him, blah, blah. And she stopped me. And she was like, Ken, I already know. I've already watched a bunch of his messages. I've watched a bunch of your, she knew a ton about our church.
Very
it was
cool.
her first time coming. I was like, my life story. I've never met you before. And that's a new reality for all of us. But I think that's going to continue. Like, we need to do the church online. Even if your numbers of online viewers goes down because the in-person attendance goes up, I think that continues to be a front door that we need to put energy towards for the future. I think something that for all of us, I would encourage is as much as possible, how do we connect people in person? So I think we're not going to just move to a completely digital world. I think we needed to live in both worlds, but I think the digital connection and reaching people online, how do we connect them in-person relationship? And I think that's a piece that I would just push for all of our churches, is that people need in-person relationship. And so how do you get people connected in smaller groups? How do you get them connected in life on life? And I don't think that's going to change. I don't think the online ongoing relationship will replace the in-person relationships.
Great. So Neal, let me pitch this to you in the form of a change up. So with that as a little bit of a backdrop, and you can give us your own take on that as well. As things are, at least here in Arizona, as I'm watching, and in other areas where I've got pastor friends, are opening back up, and so there's more freedom. I'm noticing that whatever sports venues are open, they're filling to capacity. Restaurants are filling to whatever that capacity is. Churches are not doing that. Why are churches lagging behind, and people in culture are cherry picking the things that they'll be a part of and not be a part of? And what is that teaching us about what we knew evangelism pre-COVID and post-COVID?
Yeah. Well, I think if we're talking about that is why that's not happening, I think there's a couple of reasons. One, I think it's showing us what people are willing and unwilling to do. So, for example, we have chosen to follow all of the guidelines that California has put out. And so we have people who are saying, well, if I have to wear a mask, I'm not coming back. And what I would want to say to them, but they're not on this panel, is, well, you go to Lowe's and you go to Vaughn's and you go to Trader Joe's and you have to wear a mask there. So why wouldn't you come back to Coastline? But I think one of the reasons we're not seeing them come back is because what Ken had just talked about, and what I would have shared in that last question, is online church is here to stay.
Absolutely.
And so we have people in our body, right? Like we have a guy he's been fighting cancer ever since I've been here for the last 4 years. And I'm probably not going to see him in person for a while unless I bump into him, downtown, unless I go over to his house and sit in the backyard and connect with him. And so I think there's people like that we will continue to drive, and we will continue to focus on that. We've actually made a commitment that at our 9 a.m. service, we focus more on the camera so that we connect with the online viewer than we focus on the people who are in the room. And so that's just something that we've intentionally done. But I think as we talk about other things growing up, or not growing up, but opening up, is we really do live in a phygital world, and the church is the last to kind of make that shift to that. And the phygital world being what Ken is talking about, is it is normal for someone to come and check out our website and then meet us in person. We do that all the time. You all know, gosh, I don't know about you, but I loved that Cinemark app. And when I became a member and I could book tickets and I could choose my seats for my family, and my wife was thrilled because I used to always say, we're getting there a half hour early. I'm not sitting in the front row. I want to know exactly where I'm sitting. And so we had the digital experience, and then we went in person to the physical experience. And so I think the rest of the world's up with that. I think too, David, if I can just kind of speak frankly and honestly, and pretty much everyone knows that that's my style, is I really think there's some churches that are in proximity to me that have kind of screwed it for the other churches. And I think there's some churches who've been a bad example. And I think other people go, well, if that's how they do it, then that's how these guys do it. And so I think we've caught a bad rap, at least closer to where I am.
Okay. What about you, Aubrey, in the Phoenix area, if you want to piggyback that a little bit?
So I think it's funny because I think in some instances there's, and to be honest and frank, is that there's a racial divide. And so what we've seen is that within the African-American church, or Black American church, there is not as much of a returning. And that could be a bad thing, but it's also a good thing because we find that they're still online. So they have not left. The question is how are they connecting? Because I believe inspiration comes from the big gatherings. I think inspiration comes from that, but the actual transformation takes place in a smaller group. And so the challenge is really how do we get them to smaller groups to get to interact? I think that it is the living out on a day-to-day basis that is the most important thing, not the big gathering. And so what we found was even with our food distribution, that we found individuals, even at the beginning of the pandemic, we started doing things and people were in need, and they were trying to support the schools and the children and all of the things that were necessary. People were willing to volunteer, and that volunteering was service. And I think moving to service and not just being served was, I think, a catalyst that allowed us to allow people to now understand, hey, I'm not just saved to sit, I'm saved to serve. And so that salvation to serve is where we find, I think, the growth, and that we find people doing and serving like they haven't served before. Many of our seniors didn't think that they would be able to do. I've met with a number of them, sat down with them, and they were going through all kinds of challenges. This was the only thing that was able to keep them, this having an online. One of the things that we've also done was to make sure that when they are coming to the online church, that there's interaction, that there is a connection, so it's not just showing up and nobody knows you're there, but there's someone is greeting you just as if they had walked in the building. And so we've been working really diligently at that as well, to make sure that they feel welcome and that they are noticed.
Great. Ken, that's actually a great segue with you guys. I know Mercy Roads has this digital connection card and some ways of being intentionally follow up. Talk about that as a form of outreach / evangelism and how it helps you achieve what it is you want to achieve for the sake of the gospel.
Yeah, I think something important is, as we're connecting people, whether digitally or in person, to our weekend services, is what is the end goal? And Aubrey hit on this, of like, evangelism needs to go hand in hand with discipleship and really making disciples. And so something that we found helpful is really giving clear next steps of engagement for people. So from the weekend service, what is the thing that we're asking them next? And for us, we call it the first step class. It's, a 1 hour where we explain the DNA of our church and then help them take next steps with us. Inviting people into service to be a part of what we're doing is the next thing after that. We do Rooted, which I know some of these churches do Rooted as well, but I look at Rooted as it's actually even partial evangelistic. You're inviting people into it who might not even be followers of Jesus. And through the 10-week experience, they're discovering the gospel. And we've had a lot of people getting baptized out of Rooted who are responding to the gospel. But I look at Rooted as a part of our engagement pathway, as a next step of, we're inviting people into the life of the church. And I think having those types of things where it's a really clear how we're inviting people into being discipled, and along the way, sharing the gospel with them. And so we do that with, when someone fills out a digital connect card, inviting them into our first step class, which COVID has caused us to do digitally and in person. We do that. And then taking the next step with us of Rooted, we offer in person and digitally as well. Which I think one great thing with Zoom has been, everyone knows how to use Zoom now. And when someone might have been part of a 10-week class in the past, and they might miss 2 or 3 weeks, because they're out of town, we found people are able to commit weekly because they just hop on Zoom and join the group that way. And I think that's been a great thing. Also, missing Sundays, hey, you can watch online. I think people that were infrequent attenders can become more regular attenders now in our group life.
Okay. So guys, let me ask you this, and Neal, you can tackle this one. Churches historically love to settle. About 45 minutes after Peter finished the day of Pentecost and the church burst on the scene from 120 people to 3,120 people, those people are already trying to figure out how to settle. And so historically, it's been incumbent upon pastors or leadership teams to keep the evangelistic temperature high. How are you keeping it high in your setting? And each of you, I'd love to hear you take a stab at that. Here's why. Each of you represents a different type of demographic, from the Midwest to an urban Phoenix to what you're doing with there on the coast. I'd love to hear how you're keeping the evangelistic temperature high in your church, both COVID pure, but also in a more idealistic sense.
Yeah. You guys are probably thinking I went to med school, because one of the lines that I like to say is, if we want people to bleed it, we have to hemorrhage it. So if you have an analogy that doesn't deal with blood, please let me know, but it just kind of sticks. So like, what I found for me is, I have to say it and say it and say it. And I have to say it until I'm sick of saying it. And then I have to keep saying it. So one thing was great. I've said this for 3 years here, is there's 100,000 people in Ventura who don't know Jesus. And so we're just speaking Ventura. We're not even speaking for our digital outreach, that we have. And what was really rad for me is, one Sunday, a 17-year-old girl said, she's like, well, Neal, there's 100,000 people here who don't know Jesus. And then later that week, one of our elders said it. And I was like, finally, like other people are starting to say it. And so what I would really encourage you to do is find out what those numbers are and make it real, like make it tangible, and then bring it down to a level where your people get it, where you say there's 100,000 people who don't know Jesus and 4 of them live next to you. They're your neighbors next to you. They're your apartment, the person who lives above you and below you on the apartment. And so what I would really encourage people to do, because it does, people want to settle, right? We want to do the same old thing. We had people leave our church because we don't play the song that they like, because we don't have the choir that they used to love, that they came here for. I'm sure no one else experienced that. It's probably only us. Just kidding. But what we have to do as leaders is it's our job to keep that evangelistic outreach high and to remind people what Jesus said. Jesus said, go. Jesus didn't say settle.
Sure. What about you, Aubrey?
I think one of the things that that we use is testimonies. Testimonies are the most powerful thing that we have that we can share with others, and we use them as much as possible wherever we can. I think when we look at transformed lives, even in the midst of COVID, and those who have given their life over, found themselves in situations, but in the midst of it have a testimony of God's saving and continuing power, sustaining power, and being able to share that. One of the things that I is having an outward perspective, knowing that what we're doing. We are in the process of redeveloping our website, and one of the things that I had to instill upon our team was the website is not for us; it's for those we don't know. We're not developing something that we're going to enjoy and that we want to like. We're really doing it and preparing it for someone to, and we do the same thing with our live stream. It's about reaching someone who not because we're going to be there, but we're trying to reach those. So it's really having that outward perspective in all that we choose to do, whether it be the song or the prayer or whatever it is how do we do it in a way that it is attractive to the fish we're trying to catch, not the ones who are already in the aquarium.
Love it. Ken, give us some thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think if you give people the option to not do mission, they will always choose that option, or most people will choose that option. And so I have found in helping our church not to settle is to say no to things that are not, things that are inward focused. And so there's been so many times this past year of saying no to certain church events. And I think especially particularly right now going into summertime and things are opening up more. And so it's like, hey, can we do like a church meal where it's, an event, and it's like, no, this is an inward focused thing, and we're just going to say no to it. And so just keeping on track of people will gravitate inward and comfort rather than living on mission. And so the more that we give them options to not live on mission, the more they're going to choose those things. And so just even yesterday, a guy who wanted to start a Bible study, doing walk through the Bible, and we told him no. Now, is it because we as a church don't want to study the Bible? No, that's not true. It's the only book I have on my shelf. Unlike Neal, he's got a lot of books. I just have one book. So we love the Bible. But it's because for us, all of our groups have to have a mission component, have to have an outreach component. So we said, come back to us, think through how is it going to have a mission component? How are you going to reach people through what you're doing? And because if we give them the option to not do mission, they're going to choose that every time. So I think helping our church not settle is saying no to things that might be good, but don't contribute towards the mission.
Good. Speaking of mission,
I'm just going to interrupt, David, because sorry. Is anybody else jumping inside going like, that's great. If we give them the option not to do mission, they're not.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Come on.
Love it. So let me ask you a question. Let me just veer out of bounds for a minute. 2020 not only had the coronavirus experience, but we had all kinds of cultural, political, racial stuff. And I've gone on record more than 100,000 times saying the average Christian in America should be off social media during an election year because we've thoroughly embarrassed ourselves. But having said that, throughout 2020, especially in the racial and cultural perspectives, there were a lot of things that happened, and we talk an awful lot about the negative aspects of that, and the negative aspects can be absolutely horrific. And I've hosted Aubrey on my own interactions before that I do for our church. And he's actually helped coach me and educate me on some things, along with my friend Ivan Pitts. Ivan, if you're watching, thank you as well. But what are some of the positive things, whether it was a cultural issue, a racial issue, a bleeding issue, by all of this, that opened doors for you to share Jesus that maybe wouldn't have been open? I'm not in any way smoothing over, justifying any of that stuff that was the ugly side of it. But in the midst of the ugliness, where did Jesus open a door for you to make a difference, and his word got to come to bear on somebody's life that maybe it wouldn't have had the opportunity to, and it led to meaningful substance for faith? And any of you can just raise your hand and pop in so we know who's talking. I told you I was going to veer out of bounds for just a minute.
I mean, I'll go because I got a big mouth and I'm good at talking. But we really leaned into what happened in our culture during last year, and especially like what you're talking about with what happened with race. And we did a sermon series called "You Asked for It," and that was one of the top things that our people wanted to learn about. And so we really taught on what does Scripture say, and it was such a meaningful Sunday that we actually did something on Wednesday night. We called it. We're super creative. We called it Summer Nights Bible Study. And because we could live stream.
Did it have a mission component? I'm just kidding.
It did. It helped. It's the second half of our mission, helping people follow Jesus.
Okay.
But I think what was really important, David, as many of us know, like for Coastline, we were formerly First Baptist Church. And what I didn't realize, I wasn't raised in a church. I wasn't raised in a Baptist environment. But what I found out later from some of my friends is First Baptist meant white church. Second Baptist meant black church. Am I right, Aubrey, or did I miss that?
That's correct.
That's the first time I've heard that.
Okay. So that's what I was taught. And I was appalled, you guys. I was shocked. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm embarrassed. And so I thought it was a great opportunity for us to just really go look at Scripture. And all you have to do is look at Genesis 1, that we are created in the image of God. And I think it was really powerful to help our people. I was one of the first people to speak up against, some of the killings that happened in our nation. And I use that word intentionally, the murder that we saw happen on the news. And so we spoke up against it. And I think people really appreciated us standing up for the gospel and standing up for life. Jesus said, I have come that they may have life and have it to the full.
Great.
I think one of the things that
Yeah.
I think is positive for me, not just from the racial, but also from a COVID perspective, I challenge individuals who were, especially believers. What I found were some of them had a tendency to be prideful and arrogant. And so they were basically saying, I've got my relationship with the Lord delivered me. And so, if I die, so on and so forth. And I said, listen, here's the challenge. There's someone who was in the situation that you were in who does not know him. And do you not want to have an opportunity for them to get to know him prior to a premature death? And so if there's anything that you can do to make sure concern with others. And so I use that as an opportunity to raise the awareness that, listen, it's not just about this life, but it's about the life after. And so I can use this opportunity to do some things, to sacrifice and lay down my life in regards to wearing a mask or social distancing or reaching out or speaking to someone, even in regards to some of the marches that we did. We're coming together, which was a demonstration of our ability to come together. And I think we needed to do that as a church. And I think that's one of the things that was very instrumental in our city, to be able to see the church coming together, which was an outward sign to those who did not know and did not have relationship.
Good. Ken, you want to contribute anything to this?
Yeah, I think this just raises up, the need for humility and teachability. And I think, and especially with the racial tensions in our country, that I know for me personally, just taking a posture of a listening ear and like wanting to learn. And I think for us pushing our churches into that posture as well, I think something that COVID has done that's actually been good it has kind of stirred up the people that are not humble and teachable in our churches, and have decided, hey, whether it's political, whether it's racial, whether it's should you wear masks, should you not? I've had the unique thing of we planted during this, and so I didn't have a bunch of people who were like, we've always done it this way, or you should do it this way or that. If people disagreed, they just didn't come to our church. But most other churches existed before COVID. So you've had to deal with people being upset. But I think part of that is the lack of humility and teachability. Those people have maybe left your church. And I would just say to that, some of that's addition by subtraction. You're losing people that I think it's okay that they have not had that humble posture. And I think that God is going to create a more pure version of who your body is going to be in this next season, that God's going to use to really impact and reach people.
Yeah, thank you, all of you. One of the things I noticed from a macro perspective in the American church is whether it was a COVID-related issue, a more cultural related issue, political, racial, it seemed like there were a lot of Christians who wanted to make a point, but very few who wanted to make a difference. And I think that what's behind this, somebody type that in there for us. But so many Christians want to make a point, so few want to make a difference. And I was thinking of that when Aubrey was talking, that churches who stepped up and truly wanted to make a difference earned the respect of their community, which takes me back to Acts chapter 2. Because churches did good deeds, they built goodwill. And because they built goodwill, they had the opportunity to share the good news, right? So good deeds, goodwill, good news all came into play there. Let me ask you guys a question that I think a lot of folks listening might find interest in, especially as folks start gathering. And if you're anything like our church, some of the people you thought would be back aren't back. Some of them went to other churches. Some of them haven't been to church since it shut down. Some of them are watching online for viable reasons and not just, social distancing on Sunday only. But then you've got a certain body. How does the Sunday worship experience play into your evangelistic approach? And for this question, I'm not talking so much specifically about your online audience as I am about your physical presence. And Ken, give us some insight from what you guys are doing.
Yeah, for one, probably similar to most of your guys' churches, is we share the gospel and give invitations in our service. So at the end of the message, being able to speak to, hey, maybe you're here and God's been stirring, the Holy Spirit's been stirring in your heart and life, and you want to respond. So we do that regularly in our services. So expect that there are people who are gathering who do not know Jesus, have not surrendered their life to Christ, and being intentional about that. So that's one thing. Another thing is we say almost every Sunday this saying: we believe no one's too far from God to experience life change through Jesus. And so with that, like, no matter who you are, you might be agnostic and you're here, you might be new to this whole Christian thing, but we believe no one's too far from God to experience life change, and that Jesus is real and he wants to impact your life. And then we steal the Timothy Keller of the church should be a hospital for sinners, not a museum for saints. And so we say those two lines every service, every Sunday, which I think it puts in the believers in our church, in their mindset, oh yeah, this church, we are outward focused and we're going to reach people, and imperfect people are going to show up here. And then it puts people at ease of like, hey, I'm new to church, and I can belong here, and I don't have to be perfect. And so I think just setting that culture over and over again for our church is helpful.
Great. What about you, Neal? How's the Sunday morning worship experience play into how you keep the evangelistic approach going?
So I would just echo what Ken said. I think our people know that when they come and when they bring a friend, and I say that intentionally, when they bring a friend, we've really made that something part of our culture. We want people to invite one and serve one. So invite a friend to one, serve at the other. So they know that they're going to hear the gospel. There's two things that I would add is one thing, we do something here, we call it non-assumptive preaching. And so we just don't assume that you know anything about the Bible. So if we talk about a guy named Paul, we're going to tell you that his name used to be Saul, that he killed Christians, that he traveled around. If we talk about a guy named Jesus, we're going to talk about the virgin birth. If we teach about Moses, we're going to, talk about what he did. So we want to really try to help people understand the Bible. Sometimes we just get like think about the last time you went to like a restaurant or a club or somewhere that people are used to coming. This happened to me the other day. I went to a new gym and I walked in and it was just kind of like, well, don't you know what to do? Right. And it's like embarrassing. It's awkward because I don't know what to do. I've been a part of 24-hour fitness for 14 years, but I've never been to this club right over here. And so I kind of had to figure out what's their thing. So we really try to pull that away from people. But a lot of what we try to do is we have a path to spiritual maturity, and it's gather, grow, serve, send. We couldn't figure out 4 words that started with G or 4 words that started with S. So we just went 2 and 2. But the gathering is one of our primary ways. That's our big front door where we get people to gather. And so we call it a worship service, but we also call it a gathering. It's a gathering of God's people.
Fantastic. Aubrey, what about you guys?
I would say that the worship service is, again, as I stated before, it's a place of inspiration. So our goal is to really inspire and inspire them to make the next step. One of the things that we use as our slogan, our tag, is better together. And I think when we look at the early church and we identify the necessity to come together, the necessity to connect outside of the big gathering, Scripture says that then they went to their individual homes and then talked about what they had experienced. And so really pushing that. So we sort of use that gathering as a place to be a catalyst for continued conversation. And so I think that is where we have seen people, because I had so many say, well, Pastor, when we come back together, I said, well, what are you doing now? What are you doing now? Because we need you to interact. We don't need to wait until we get back into the building. It's about outside. And some who have come back, it's interesting, some who have come back realize that it's not the same. But they, I think, had to reevaluate what is the purpose in gathering. And what is the purpose for this event that we have once a week, that you come, but actually living it out. And so that's one of the things that we've done. And so we use it as a point to actually a pace, again, for inspiration to connect in some other areas, to connect with some of the things that we're doing during the week. So we try to emphasize those.
One of the things that I'm hearing from you all collectively in your own way of saying things is that there is an expectation that your people will be bringing people. Also, that there's an expectation that there will be people who are not followers of Jesus sitting in your auditorium, or for sure watching you online. And I tell you that to say this, a few weeks ago, I was talking about the anxiety levels and depression levels and coping mechanisms. And I was just rattling off a litany of things in no particular order. And then one of those things I said, and some of you know that you've taken one more drink than you needed to take, and just kind of kept on going. Well, I got a follow-up phone call from somebody from our online audience asking me about that. And it was a Christian who was concerned that I was promoting social drinking and stuff. And I'm not here. This is a conversation about that. But my response was, are you under the assumption that I'm only preaching to Christian people in our church? Because if I am, then we should shut our doors tomorrow and send these people to church that's actually doing something. And I think setting that expectation, would you all agree that we are a church that's going to minister to who's here, but we're going to set ourselves up to reach those who need to be here, need to hear, whatever the framing of that is. So yeah, that just popped into my head as you guys were talking. For those of you who are in our listening audience, these guys are way wiser than I, but I couldn't help but stick that little nugget in. It's the only thing I can contribute to this entire conversation. Let me ask you guys something, because each of you
tag onto that just for one.
Absolutely.
I'm good at interrupting, sorry. But I think too, it's really good for us to intentionally in our sermons say, because I'll do what you're doing, but I'll say, hey, if you're a Christian, I want to talk to you about this. And I'll say, if you haven't given your life to Jesus yet, And I think what it does is it helps people go like, okay, he's really talking to me in this part.
Absolutely. Yeah, it matters. It matters. And they know that they're included and thought of from that perspective. Hey guys, kind of one last question. We got about 10 minutes left, so each of you got about 3 minutes to take a shot at this. I love the fact that we're in really, really distinct contexts. Again, urban Phoenix, coastal California, heart of the Midwest. And so what is the greatest challenge your church in your setting, demographically, politically, the whole 9 yards? What is the greatest challenge your church is currently facing in reaching others for Jesus? Aubrey, you want to go ahead and lead this one off?
I'll do my best. I think the biggest,
I love his humility.
I think the major thing is just before COVID hit, I had one of our younger ministers actually plant, and he actually planted a church. I wanted to be more involved with it, but I was not permitted to do that, and so. And I think there are a number of reasons. I really believe that some of it was God's design and purpose for it to happen the way it did. But I realized that that's one of the things that we have to be able to do is to plant. I think we are challenged with planting, specifically in our community, that we don't do it well. Our plants are normally splits. And so it's better to intentionally plant. And so really learning how to do that, doing that better. I think the other thing that would impact our greatest challenge is gathering the small groups. I think that we do have the opportunity with technology to not allow geographical challenges to no longer hinder us from being able to gather. So when we launched Alpha, we had individuals from Jamaica who participated. And so we had people from all over the valley. We have Celebrate Recovery online, and we've had a number of people. That is a evangelistic catalyst. We've had individuals who've gotten out of prison and didn't know where to go, and they've come online for Celebrate Recovery. And so we've had this opportunity. It is, and I think the challenge will be the follow through, the follow up, the connection. You have people who are coming, but you also need those who are willing to walk with them through it, because it doesn't just end with a meeting, or it actually is, how do we do this on a daily basis? How do we do that? So that's part of the disciple making training, I think, teaching people how to walk with others, specifically when you don't know them and you've just met them. So
Good stuff. Good stuff. Thank you. How about you, Ken? What's the greatest challenge your church is facing in your community and reaching others for Jesus?
Yeah, I think as things are opening up more and more, busyness. People are getting more and more busy. You know, everything's slowed down for a while. And I know my wife and I, our kids, we've got tons of sports we're doing right now. And our life is just like 100 miles an hour, busy, busy, busy. And so in the midst of that, I think it's easy for us to not make time for non-Christian friends and reaching other people. And that's often one of the things that goes. So I think busyness is a challenge. And then I think just the apathy, like we were saying, if you give people the option to do anything but mission, they'll do that. And I think people would rather chew their fingernails off than share their faith with other people, to be honest. And so I think that's one of the greatest challenges, is that all of our churches have, sleeping giants of the faith who are inactive right now in living on mission and sharing their faith with others. And they're just relying on the few that are more evangelistic, or the pastor. And I think so for us, for our church, how do we get your everyday person in the body of Christ to live on mission? How do we equip them to do that? And I think, I don't know how we've gotten through 54 minutes of this and not mentioned Tom Mercer and Oikos and High Desert Church, because that has been the most effective thing. So if you're not familiar with that, of everyone's got 8 to 15 relationships that are on the front row of your life, that you do life with, that God has strategically and supernaturally placed in your life. And so thinking about, God has blessed you to be a blessing in their lives and impact them. And there ought to be some non-believers or pre-Christians in that front row of your life. And you're called to impact them and influence them in your sphere of influence. So helping our church, how do we keep getting that in front of them of who's the 8 to 15? We don't call it oikos like Tom. So Tom, if you're watching this, sorry, we've rebranded it our church. We just call it 8 to 15. But who are the 8 to 15 people that God's placed in your life for you to make an impact, and keep driving that to our people, actually writing lists and praying for others, so that our people are constantly realizing God has placed me where I am to impact the lives of others.
Great. And Ken, just so you know, we actually had an over-under line in Vegas on how far we could get into this conversation without 8 to 15 showing up. And so if you were at 54 minutes, you either won or lost a lot of money. Hey, Neal, we got just a couple of minutes left. Give us the biggest challenge that you're facing there at Coastline on the California coast, and reaching people for Jesus, as I know this is something that's really important to you, and some things maybe you've done to help equip Coastline in this process.
Yeah. So I'm going to just say, like, everything that was said is good. So I don't need to say that again.
Exactly. It's great.
So do that part that these guys already talked about. But what Ken's talking about is what I want to touch on, is we call it friendship evangelism. And so I think one of the biggest challenges is people think, well, it's your job, Neal. Like, right, I tithe to the church. That's what I do. You take care of that part. And so what we actually did a couple of years ago is we did like a business size card, and I actually lost mine, and it's just, we asked people to write 5 names. We just figured, 8 to 15, they don't got that much time in Victorville to do other surfing things. So sorry, Tom, if you're watching this. So we just kind of lowered the bar for our people to 5. We were like, hey, man, if they could just pray for 5 people.
Church for underachievers.
Totally underachievers, man. We're good. I know a church, they just do 1. So either they're laser focused or lazy. But really what it is it's the fact of the matter is, pray for lost people that you're not praying for today. And so take it on your own, take ownership in that. Like we need God to give us that fire and that desire. We need to see people the way that God sees them. There's a video clip. I used to work with a guy, and he called me the video clip guy. And it's that Bruce Willis movie. Remember with that little kid? What man? The Sixth Sense. It's called The Sixth Sense. And Bruce Willis is talking to this kid, and this little kid's scared, and he goes, "What's wrong?" And the kid goes, "I see dead people." He goes, "They're everywhere." And he says, "They're walking around and they don't even know that they're dead." And that's the eyes that we need believers to see. We need to start seeing people with spiritual eyes, that they're dead people. They're walking around and they don't even know it. And God has strategically placed us in their neighborhood, at their gym, at their coffee shop, to help spread the message of Jesus. And so the biggest challenge is apathy. We are apathetic to the gospel. We are inundated with information, and our face is stuck in this, so that we're not seeing who God has placed in front of us. I'm going to start preaching, so I'm going to stop.
Yeah, but you circle back around to many of the people who are in our listening audience are most likely in church leadership, if not pastors. It goes back to the question we discussed earlier about churches loving to settle. And it's incumbent upon us to keep those revival fires, as they say, where I come from in the Midwest, next door to Ken. I grew up in Ohio, keep those revival fires hot and burning. Hey, Transformation Ministries worldwide. You all have been an amazing, gracious audience. Thank you for tuning in with us. Say a quick thank you down there in the chat line, if you would, to Ken and to Aubrey and Neal. And guys, absolutely incredible information. We could have done this for another hour and a half and still not touched on all the pertinent stuff. Maybe we'll get a chance to cycle it back. And I'm like, Frank Isola on Pardon the Interruption. I'm just pinch hitting today. Fill in Frank, they call him. But it's been my privilege to host this conversation. Folks, thank you so much for being a part of it. Just so you know, this conversation has been recorded. It will be available on TM, I think through the Facebook page and different things. If you want to bring some of your staff or some of your leaders and have them pick up a few tidbits, there's tons of wisdom these 3 guys have shared with us. And folks, we absolutely love you. Thanks for being a part of Transformation Ministries. Thanks for being a part of this webinar. Ken, Aubrey, Neal, thanks so much for being my friends and for sharing in this. God bless, guys. Have a great day. We'll talk again soon.